my number one favorite moment in the entire trial had to be when Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts
Mm-hmm.
gave his entire speech to Howard. He laid into Howard for a good couple of minutes about, Howard, who has historically, whenever he talks about his roots, he talks about how he comes from poverty. His father was laid
Mm-hmm.
off, had no rights as a worker. And Ed Markey drew like this really like deep, detailed parallel between us as the workers at Starbucks and the struggles that his father allegedly went through as a worker with no rights, and ends it basically saying like, these workers, they are just like your father, they have no rights. And it was just like this
Mm-hmm.
moment.
All across America, workers are saying that they've had enough. Rising inequality and outlandish CEO pay for those at the top, like you, and a paycheck to paycheck subsistence for everyone else. The unionizing Starbucks workers are on the front lines as a groundswell of working and middle class people were banding together to assert their right to organize, form a union, and collectively bargain for their dignity. My father used to tell me that you can't beg for your rights, you have to tell them. He lost his finger in an industrial accident as a young man. There was no OSHA. He just said, the boss said, see you next week, John, back on the job. That was before unions. That was before rights were put on the books. And ultimately, that's what Starbucks workers are doing. Workers in Buffalo are the spark that's lit the fire of organizing its locations across the country, including 15 Starbucks locations in Massachusetts. The American people are watching. Public support for unions hit a record high late last year with 71% of Americans approving of labor unions. So as you sit here denigrating your workers, you're not just morally and legally wrong, you're in the minority. You're out of touch. Union busting is disgusting. I got the chance this week to meet with Caitlin, who is a Starbucks employee from Gardner, Massachusetts. Like you, Caitlin cares deeply about Starbucks. She originally started working for the company in 2006 and came back to rejoin Starbucks in 2021. When she came back, she saw Starbucks similar to how you describe it in your testimony, a company that had lost its way. She saw a company that now only cared about money at the expense of the health and well-being of its workers. So to help save the Starbucks she once knew and loved, Caitlin and her co-workers formed a union. They wanted to revive a wayward company, make your company better. But you vilify Caitlin and her colleagues for caring. You demonize them for participating in their fundamental right to organize. And worse, you and your company set out to punish Caitlin and her colleagues, withholding benefits and raises, cutting hours, and purposefully understaffing to harm their most dedicated partners. So when you give us 10 pages of testimony extolling the benefits that Starbucks offers its employees, that's not what I see. I see Caitlin. I see you squeezing the people who have made you rich with blatant disregard for the law, perhaps because you think if you can hire the lawyers and pay the union-busting consulting firms, you can get away with violating other people's rights, with disregarding their dignity, and with silencing working people in America. But here's the thing. If you can pay the lawyers and the consultants and the PR specialists, you can also pay the workers a fair wage. So you say that your father was unfairly fired after he was injured on the job. Your father had no rights, and your family paid the price. That is how your workers now feel. They have no rights. They don't want to be like your father, who had no rights. They don't want their families to have to pay the price for their children the way your father had to pay a price for his children. They want rights. Your father couldn't protect himself. That's all your workers are looking for, so they can protect themselves and their families so that what happened to your family does not happen to their family. I don't think you understand that, Mr. Schultz. They're just looking to be someone who can protect themselves in a way your father could not. So, Mr. Schultz, I would just hope that you would understand that. But I'm afraid you don't. I'm afraid that if you step down as CEO, that you don't understand that these people are afraid that your company will lose its way again, and that they need rights that don't just come from you, but come from the company. That's what they're looking for. It lost its way, you say you're back, but it could lose its way again. Workers should not be dependent upon you, Mr. Schultz, in your sense of right and wrong. They should be able to have laws, protections, unions that stand up for them every single day of the year. And that is something I think, Mr. Schultz, that you just fundamentally don't understand. These workers are just like your father, and they have no rights.
And it's like no secret that Howard Schultz has these like, these insane daddy issues. Like they go deep. If you read his 2019 book, he contradicts, his current public face and calls his father like this like worthless, incompetent, skillless person, and then goes on to address how his father actually used to physically beat him. So it's really interesting to see. Yeah. Oh Lord. Yeah, it's not good. But it's really interesting to see, the dynamic shift from that to how he talks about his dad being this like, this martyr like savior for him whenever he's talking about union stuff.
So he's weaponizing his dad's authentic struggles, economic struggles, and it seems like some personal struggles to launder his own abuses of workers as the CEO of Starbucks.
100%. And it caused him to lose his cool in front of everybody at the trial. Howard Schultz is not someone who stays on script ever. He's notorious for breaking script and saying whatever he wants for as long as he wants. And this is the first time I've ever seen him actually prepared to speak or to keep his cool. And then Ed Markey said that, and Howard just started going. He was just like, "You don't understand. You have no idea." And it was incredible.
Okay, I'm so glad you're here with us, Tyler. For those, we're just jumping right into this. I'm so glad to be joined today on Bad Faith Podcast by Tyler Keeling, who is an organizer with Starbucks United, a barista in Long Beach. Welcome to Bad Faith Pod.
Thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here.
Okay, so I prompted you by saying, what did you have some favorite moments from the hearing to pull, and you cited that as one of the best. And I love that you went there, because my impression of the sections of the hearings that I watched were that Howard Schultz had a weirdly large chip on his shoulder for one of the richest men in the world, who has been able to avoid for such a long time all of these accusations of labor violations for so long, and it was really managed to stay on the kind of like good guy side of CEOs as far as these things go. It's a perch that you can fall off of. You saw Zuckerberg used to be on the good side of the CEO aisle. Post 2016, he became on the bad side of the CEO aisle. There's a bunch of Republicans who talk about woke CEOs and put a lot of people on what is supposed to be the liberal good side of the aisle. But Howard Schultz, who has, I think, enjoyed unfairly a lot of positivity in the broader media sphere, was extremely angry. He went so far as to even push back against the idea of being described as a billionaire.
Oh, he sure did. No, he, he came like a half second short of saying that billionaire was a slur or something like that. Like, it was so unreal.
This moniker billionaire, let's just get at that, okay? I grew up in federally subsidized housing. Let me finish. I grew up in federally subsidized housing. My parents never owned a home. I came from nothing. I thought my entire life was based on the achievement of the American dream. Yes, I have billions of dollars. I earned it. No one gave it to me. And I've shared it constantly with the people of Starbucks. And so anyone who keeps labeling this billionaire thing, it's
Mr. Schultz, I don't mean to cut you off. We have time limits here, and you have had the opportunity. I'm not cutting you off.
It's your moniker constantly. It's unfair.
No, it is not. You have had more time. I've been generous with the time. I'm sorry.
But, Mr. Chairman.
We have a room full of people. We have a panel to go after you. You're not the only person testifying.
Okay.
Senator Cassidy.
And he even admitted, he was like, yes, I have these billions of dollars, but I am not a billionaire. And
He's worth $4 billion. This is an actual factual.
He is in the richest men alive category. Like, there's absolutely no ifs, ands, or buts about this. And he wants to sit there and try to liken himself to like the struggles of people in poverty and his workers. And it's like, my guy, you have all stepped down from, this is now his third time stepping down from the role of CEO. most of us will never climb a corporate ladder to anywhere relatively close to that. Like, there's no comparison there. It's absolutely insane that he could even think that you could make a comparison like that to, being somebody who will never have to struggle for the rest of his life, and probably, the generations that follow him and his familial line will never have to struggle, versus us, these workers who, many of us, do come from poverty, who are simply fighting for rights in an equitable workplace. It always takes me back to the speech he gave in Buffalo, where he compared Starbucks workers to Holocaust victims.
You're kidding.
Oh, have you not seen the
Wait.
blanket speech?
The blanket speech? Wait, this is vaguely familiar. Remind me what this was?
This was way back at the beginning of the campaign in Buffalo. Not long after the campaign had gone public, they held this massive captive audience meeting where they shut down all the stores in Buffalo and brought partners in from every store, and surprise introduced Howard Schultz as a key speaker. And he rambles on for an hour. And at one point he gives a speech where he talks about he was so inspired by some man he met when he was traveling who gave him these stories. And one of these stories was about how in the Holocaust, they shipped people off to the concentration camps in these train carts. And he goes on to talk about how for every 6 person, only 1 person got a blanket. And so the person who was gifted the blanket had to make the decision if they were going to keep the blanket for themselves or share it with everyone. And it goes on to say that here at Starbucks, we share our blanket. We choose to share our blanket with you. It's one of the most embarrassing things in the world.
Stop.
When people in Germany and in Poland were sent to the concentration camps, they were thrown into rail cars, and sometimes the journey was 8 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours, no light, no water, no food. And when they arrived at the camps, the rail cars were slammed open. And you could hear that metal door just right against the cold weather. Men were separated from women, and women were separated from children. And 1 person for every 6 was given a blanket. 1 blanket for every 6 people. And the person who got the blanket had to decide what to do with this blanket that I have for myself. And not everyone, but most people shared their blanket with 5 other people. And the rabbi says to me, take your blanket and go share it with 5 other people. And so much of that story is threaded into what we have tried to do at Starbucks, is share our blanket.
Who is that for? Oh my God. Okay. Right. Well, so maybe this is a time. We've touched on Howard Schultz's origin story and some of his less glamorous moments. Why don't you tell us, Tyler, why you got involved with this campaign and reorient the audience, remind us all what this fight is really for?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a little bit about me. I've been with the company now for 6.5 years. I've been with the company since I was 20 years old, and I was homeless, technically. I was living off of someone's couch that I had just moved onto their couch. I was desperate for a job. I had no money to my name. I came to this company looking for a place where, I could be myself. I'm a younger gay man. And so, especially pre-passing DOMA, it was a really scary time to be gay. I also come from a very conservative town and a very conservative family. And Starbucks had this reputation, this huge reputation. Everybody knew it as the company where you went to work if you were gay. So I went to the company desperately looking for a job. I think I had applied from the time I was 16. I finally got the job when I was 20. And within weeks, it was discrimination. I faced discrimination as a gay worker in the store. And I also received discrimination from customers, to which I was essentially blamed for by my manager. And nothing that the company said they were externally ever, they never lived up to that. And it was just a series of failures after failures for me and my coworkers, no matter what store I worked at or where I lived. And, flash forward, this is back in 2016, I joined the company. Flash forward to the pandemic, and I just watched the company that's already like been going downhill since I started working there hit like what I consider to be a new rock bottom for them, which I didn't think they could go any lower. And it became such a toxic and like hard place to work, like harder than it had ever been. We were one of the only places that was like open during the pandemic. Our turnover skyrocketed. Safety conditions weren't met. And we were just expected to adapt as these low income workers. And it was miserable. I was on my way out of the company before Buffalo went public. I had demoted from my position. I was focusing on the ASU school benefit Starbucks provided, which absolutely ate my personal time outside of work. I had no life. And I was just completely and utterly miserable because the company, by design, made my life miserable. And it wasn't just me, it was everyone I worked with. We had a manager who, no matter how much we begged for any sort of like not sustainable, like consistent hours for our job, or like any sort of changes in the job to protect us, they weren't met, they were dismissed. No matter what harassment we faced, we were blamed for it, or we were told that we should have handled it better. And then it all came to a head when every single friend that I had in that store, I was forced to work at nights against my will. And every single person that I worked with, my close friend group, all quit the same week because they were also fed up with the job. And that was only a couple months before Buffalo went public. And then that's when I also chose to demote. From there, like, I was like, okay, I need to get out of this job. Like, I don't care. I'll take on the student loans. I'll take on the debt. Like, I can't do this anymore. It was destroying my life. And then Buffalo went public. And for the first time in the time that I had worked at the company, I saw like an actual avenue for positive change. It felt very hopeful. And, I started following the campaign really closely. The first time I saw anything about the campaign was a TikTok, actually, of the former president of Starbucks North America, Rossann Williams. They posted a video of her sweeping the floors. And I was just like, there's no way. Like, what is this? This is nonsense. This woman is so rich and invisible. Like, what is she doing in Buffalo, New York? And that's when I learned that they were a bunch of executives and other support managers, which was basically just managers flown into Union Bust, had all been flown into Buffalo to surveil workers.
So you're watching all of this from the other side of the country in Santa Barbara.
Yep.
So at what point did you start to think, okay, we can put into effect some of the labor actions that we're seeing in Buffalo here in my own Starbucks? And how did that start percolating in your own context?
The day Buffalo won, December 9th, I went to a couple of my friends in the store after a particularly horrid shift. We were all off at the same time. And I was like, guys, something needs to change. Can we go out to breakfast? And so me and a handful of my coworkers went out to a Red Robin, which is kind of like not my favorite, but it's right across the street from our store. So we're like, whatever, convenient. Let's just go. And I brought it up to them. I was like, guys, look at this. This just happened. Like, this is incredible. And none of us really knew much about unions, but I knew that like unions were good for workers. I didn't know the intricacies of like labor history or anything like that, but I knew we could do it too, and we needed to do it. Like, I've watched people go through so much working at Starbucks, and it like ruined lives. And we knew we could do it. And so when I was talking to them about it, we basically formed our initial organizing committee then and there. And we reached out. It took about a month after that for us to reach out to Workers United. And once we did, we just kickstarted. And we started organizing and talking to everyone in the store and like preparing them by what we saw happening in Buffalo. Like, we fully expected everything that was happening in Buffalo to happen when we started organizing and went public with it too. So, we formed a community, and like we formed like a certain bond and ability to trust each other, geared around organizing and winning so we could fight for actually better for ourselves.
So when you reached out to Starbucks Workers United, they were able to, I presume, tell you what steps needed to be taken to actually unionize your Starbucks?
Yep. So we reached out to them February 7th, actually, and I had a call with them February 8th. They got back to me same day, and we set a day to call the next day. And I sat on Zoom with our organizer and then one of the leaders from Buffalo for 2 hours. talking about like how to organize and like what we needed to do and how we could be successful. And we filed literally like exactly to the day 1 month later
Huh.
with almost everybody. We had like 80% of workers in the stores sign cards to file for our election.
Tyler, that's incredible.
In retrospect, it was funny because like now, helping other stores organize, I see like, bigger hurdles and stuff. And like I see from
You're like Elle Woods. You're like, what? Like it's hard after getting into Harvard Law School.
To be fair, I had my fair share of breakdowns while organizing just because there was so much and it felt so stressful. But it's in retrospect, like it's wild because like, I see these hurdles other people are facing with organizing and like the fear that has come about because of this insane union busting campaign. But I've also seen, new unique ways that people have come up, other organizers and stores, the ways they've come up to trump that and beat that and organize their stores as well.
So, a federal labor judge ordered Starbucks to reinstate seven fired workers, to reopen a shuttered location, and to stop infringing on various other rights. I mean, how afraid were you while you were in the process of organizing that some of the retaliatory measures that we've seen Starbucks has undertaken and which has been sanctioned for undertaking by the courts were going to befall you and your coworkers?
When we started organizing, I fully expected to be fired once we went public. I had fully anticipated, and I told my coworkers, if they fire me, you go through with the election and you vote yes. I was willing to put myself on that line because, in the 6.5, almost 7 years that I've been with this company, I really have seen just like the true face of evil within this company. And for me, it was more worth risking fighting for change for me and all my coworkers than it was to sit in fear. And I know that fear can be very great for some people, and a lot of people don't have the ability to, losing their job really could ruin their lives. And for me, it could have too, don't get me wrong, but something needed to change. Like it was more worth, getting fired than anything. Like I would have rather how do I say, like, it didn't matter to me if I was going to be fired because we needed to organize. We needed a union. The company clearly did not care about us to any degree, or at least enough to actually like make a change to protect us. And we were willing to risk it because we couldn't keep living like that.
You strike me as a kind of a special kind of person with a unique sort of motivation, not just because you took this on and were willing to take this risk on and demonstrate this kind of leadership capacity, but because you're the kind of person who also felt compelled to read Howard Schultz's book in the middle of all of this. I mean, what made you want to do that?
It was less like I wanted to read it, and more that when I got hired on, I actually got hired on in the state of Washington, and my manager, as part of like my onboarding stuff, she gave me my apron, my employee handbook, and she gave me a copy of his book and was like, you should read this to know the company. And she would like always try to kick up conversation around that book. And I was like, fine, I'll read it. And so I read his first book. And then when did his second book come out? I feel like his second book, it was like maybe like 2019 or something. I don't remember. I remember getting a copy of it because it was in my store. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to read that too. Like, I hate this man. I need to read this. Like, it was like
the enemy.
Yeah, sort of, but also just like, I don't know, something to me in 2019 was so bored that I was like, I can read this effectively and have a time with it.
So apart from drawing some insights into why he bristled so at the accusations of being called a billionaire, and why he leaned so hard on his father's own struggle story to insulate him from attacks of being kind of an out of touch rich guy, did you glean anything else from the biography that we should know without having to read it ourselves?
It was just all very much about him, and it's funny because like there's one quote in, I feel like it was his first book, the first one I read, and I don't remember at this point. It's been so long. But he literally says something along the lines of like, if workers believed in me and my vision for this company and them, they wouldn't want a union. And I'm like it's so, Like the guy thinks of himself as like a Jesus figure. He thinks of himself as like a very a martyr for the greater good of people, but then it's very clearly it's clear that he's not.
Have you ever heard him or seen him in the hearings or elsewhere engage substantively with the labor violations he's been charged with, which have been proven? I mean, I saw him say something about how, the things that the labor violations have been de minimis, Is that it? Is that his only reaction that you've seen at any point in the hearing? Was there any glimmer of a recognition that, okay, yes, we've made mistakes and we shouldn't do that going forward?
No, it's literally 100% of the time it's been, we'll do what we need to by labor law and we don't union bust. Howard has admitted that he doesn't want his workers to unionize on multiple occasions, but there's never he refuses to acknowledge even the ALJ decisions against the company. Going down to the point where in the trial at one point he says well, I might have had conversations that could have been misinterpreted, but blah 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 blah.
Were you ever informed of or involved in a decision to discipline a worker in any way who is part of a union organizing tribe?
I was not.
Have you ever threatened, coerced, or intimidated a worker for supporting a union?
I've had conversations that could have been interpreted in a different way than I intended. That's up to the person who received the information that I spoke to him about.
But he hasn't and won't ever admit to the union busting that he has been responsible for, despite flying out to Buffalo to compare us to all the Holocaust victims.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that at one point. I think he was instructed to make a video explaining that Starbucks workers have the right to organize, and he refused to do that, or to hang signs saying the same, and he's just refused to do those kinds of things. It's really striking. I mean, I want to ask you more about the hearing itself. What did you make of the exchange between Schultz and Bernie, where Schultz tried to turn it around and accuse Bernie of being a millionaire who basically had no standing to talk to Schultz or criticize Schultz for his labor practices?
Mr. Chairman, you yourself have been very successful. Rightfully so. Glad you have been. You've been in office for 28 years, and you and your wife have immersed a wealth of over $8 million. And in fact, your quote on being wealthy and being a millionaire was, well, if you write a bestseller, you can be a millionaire too. If you can be a millionaire, why can't Mr. Schultz and other CEOs be millionaires and be honest too? If that's the case, then why is it that Mr. Schultz, who actually creates jobs and a bestseller of a book, isn't creating any jobs? Why is it that he's corrupt and you're not? Why is it that all CEOs are corrupt because they're wealthy, and yet our chairman, who is wealthy, and I'm glad you are, you're not? Chairman, you are chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. We shouldn't have a biased approach. We should have what's best for America and all those that want to thrive and work in it. And so while we politically disagree, Mr. Schultz, I applaud you for your success. And I applaud all the CEOs out there for their success, and all the employees that work hard, that's in the same boat, that's making their companies great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, let me respond. The senator did mention my name, I think. And I think you got an all-time record here. You've made more misstatements in a shorter period of time than I have ever heard.
Please correct
me. Well, if I'm worth $8 million, excuse me.
It's all public.
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right? Excuse me.
Yes, sir.
If I'm worth $8 million, that's good news to me. I'm not aware of it. That's a lie. All right? Number two.
Part of public records.
You're probably looking at some phony right-wing internet stuff. It ain't true.
No.
All right? You should read beyond that. It is not true.
It's part of public records.
No, it is not public record.
Okay. Well, you made $1.7 million on your book.
Public record.
You made $1.7 on your book.
Excuse me. I've got the mic now. Number
Did you
two,
not make the statement
I
that if
have
you want to
the
be a
mic
millionaire?
now. I've got it.
Did you not make that statement?
You had your time.
Okay.
All right? You're not telling the truth. Second of all, you got no evidence that I have ever said that all CEOs are corrupt. I have never, ever said that.
Probably not all, but every time you talk about CEOs, you do say that.
Say it. Furthermore, what this hearing is about is whether or not you talk about being pro-union. Really, what this hearing is about is whether workers have the constitutional right to form a union. The evidence is overwhelming, not from me, but from the National Labor Relations Board, is that time after time after time, despite what Mr. Schultz is saying, Starbucks has broken the law and has prevented workers from joining unions to collectively bargain for decent wages and benefits.
It's goofy. I don't know. Like my biggest reaction to that is it's just so like it's unsubstantial and it's so deflective. Like there's, he's trying to flip it and take the heat off of him. And there's multiple senators who also tried to take Howard Schultz off topic, or not take Howard Schultz off topic, rather take the topic off of Howard Schultz and union busting. But yeah, I can't even think of it as anything other than just like attempt at buying and killing time so the trial would be over before he slipped up and said something stupid. Because he is very notorious for going and saying things like he's not supposed to. Like there was an interview he did last year where he said something like, "Oh, I'll never work with the union," which we filed an unfair labor practice charge against that because that's illegal to say.
Yeah, Elon Musk got into trouble for saying something like that online. I think a lot of these guys, one, they don't understand what labor law requires, and they also have access to platforms and a lot of hubris, and they end up getting themselves into exactly those kind of violations.
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, Howard Schultz is a ULP machine. He opens his mouth and there's like, okay, well, there's 20 things he said that are illegal there.
So, okay, so for people who you might look at this hearing and say, okay, these things happen. We've had Twitter files hearings. We've had weaponization of the federal government hearings. There's hearings for everything. Does anything actually change? What were you hoping happened in these hearings? We had some of these spicy confrontations. Did you feel like it was productive?
I absolutely felt like it was productive. And I'll be real, like going into that trial, I had no clue what to expect from the trial or like outcomes of the trial. But the one thing, I mean, there's two things I hope for, right? The first one was jail time, which I knew was unrealistic, but in my heart of hearts, I was like, that would be so funny. But the other was more so kind of like the effect that the trials had on the public, which is, finally having an accessible way to see Howard Schultz and what he has to say about the last year and a half of the union effort, like the union drive and workers organizing. And being able to see that it's clear that he's lying, and that the company has, internally speaking, made it very. They've said a lot about the union drive to workers and basically claimed that we're just a bunch of unhappy aggressors who are just fighting the company because we're mad at our managers. They've painted this like really evil picture of us to a lot of partners across the country and stores that aren't union. And I really was hoping, and I've already seen it, right? Seen the effect of this, but that a lot of those people and a lot of partners in stores, a lot of the workers in stores who haven't been able to talk to like a union partner could see for themselves that the company was lying to them and dispel this like weird myth and illusion that the company and that Howard have put up for them. Because there's a lot of people who really their only viewpoint on this has been from corporate propaganda that's been fed to them through like internal communications. So, but I mean, there's even people like, I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Give me 1 second, I'll tell you. But
Sure.
There's even people such as, come on, Twitter, do your thing. James Hoffman, who is like a notorious, like YouTube, not notorious, that sounds negative, but like a very popular and known coffee YouTuber, who before the trial, like he hadn't said anything about Starbucks Workers United. But after the trial, he, basically was like, oh, like Starbucks is a union buster. He like went into comments on his video about about the olive oil drink that we just launched, and was like, hey, this is bad timing. I actually didn't know about, the union busting. It was unclear to me before the trial, but now I know that the company is union busting and actively fighting against its workers. And he claims support for Starbucks Workers United. So, that social impact is really like the number one thing I wanted to see out of this trial, and it's happening.
So you think in the same way that Buffalo modeled a different kind of outcome for yourself or something that you could pursue in your own store, the publicity around the Howard Schultz hearings could do the same for other workers across the country?
I've talked to more workers in the last week than I have in a very long time about wanting to organize their stores. There's all sorts of people who've reached out to organize their stores or get involved in supporting the campaign publicly because of that trial, because they saw just how like egregious and like how like egregious the union busting campaign has been against us and how much of a liar our own CEO is about this.
Well, what kinds of, do you remember specifically the kinds of events, the kinds of violations that made an impression on people that caused them to want to pick up the phone and call Starbucks Workers United and see what they could do?
Yeah, I mean, a big one is firings. Starbucks has fired over 200, almost 250 workers, maybe over 250 workers now, for organizing their stores. Literally the Friday after the trial, they fired Lexi Rizzo, who is one of the key proponents that started this campaign. And people react to that. When people see, I know that there's kind of like this idea that people don't care about injustices, but I really do, in my heart of hearts, believe that people do care about injustices and want to help. And a lot of times people just don't know how to help because the avenues in which people can help feel so inaccessible. But when people get to, see like the forest for the trees and see the company firing union organizers and shutting down stores like they did with the Ithaca, New York store, or the store, the first one in Seattle, the Broadway and Denny's store, people react to that and want to help because they see that not only are we just exercising our legally protected rights, but that we are actively being aggressed against by this multi-billion-dollar global company.
There was this incredible moment where I believe it was with Bernie Sanders. There was this back and forth where he just would not admit to ever breaking the law. He just would not admit, despite having been proven and him having been fined and sanctioned already, that Starbucks had ever actually broken the law.
Do you understand that in America, workers have a fundamental right to join a union and collectively bargain to improve wages, benefits, and working conditions? Do you understand that?
I understand, and we respect the right of every partner who wears a green apron, whether they choose to join a union or not.
Are you aware that NLRB judges have ruled that Starbucks violated federal labor law over 100 times during the past 18 months, far more than any other corporation in America?
Sir, Starbucks Coffee Company unequivocally, and let me set the tone for this very early on, has not broken the law.
Okay. Are you aware that on March 1st, 2023, an administrative law judge found Starbucks guilty of, quote, egregious and widespread misconduct, end quote, widespread coercive behavior, and showed, quote, a general disregard for the employees' fundamental rights, end quote, in a union organizing campaign that started in Buffalo, New York in 2021. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware that those are allegations, and Congress has created a process that we are following, and we're confident that those allegations will be proven false.
All right. Mr. Schultz, before answering the following questions, let me remind you that federal law at 18 U.S. Code Section 1001 prohibits knowingly and willfully making any fraudulent statement.
I understand that.
Were you ever informed of or involved in a decision to fire a worker who was part of a union organizing drive?
I was not.
And I wonder if that resonated for people in particular, because it really did seem, sometimes you're cornered and sometimes you mess up. Sometimes you did the bad thing, but there seems to be more grace in just acknowledging it and moving forward than just doubling down in the face of overwhelming evidence that you're lying. And he did the latter. Do you know the moment I'm talking about?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I was sitting in that crowd angry on Twitter when that happened, so I was ears open on everything.
Yeah, I mean, did that even surprise you? Or you're so familiar with Howard Schultz, the man, having read 2 of his biographies, that was par for the course?
I expected it. I truly did. I expected more aggressive lies from him, honestly, than just that. I mean, there was this incredible point where he was being asked a question, I think by Senator Bob Casey, and I might be incorrect about that, but I'm pretty sure it was during Senator Bob Casey asking questions to him, and he just straight up says something about like Starbucks never union busting, and you can hear audibly the entire like my side of the crowd. There were two sides of the crowd. There was all these people Starbucks brought there, which is funny because there's a couple of them who are going to actually be on trial soon for union busting and illegally firing workers. And then our side, which is all union people, Starbucks Workers United workers, organizers that are on the campaign or have helped the campaign. And you hear our entire side of the crowd just laugh because it's just like this man is lying to a point where like we can't even do anything but laugh at him, just like trying so hard to deny the truth.
Did he flinch? Was there any reaction from him to the crowd's laughter?
I'll have to look at the video. I don't know. Unfortunately, I couldn't see his face when he was testifying.
Yeah.
God, I wish I could have. Wish I could have stared him in the eyes. But the entire crowd like audibly laughed. I had people texting me left and right. It was like, oh my God, like I heard the laughing. I heard you laughing. It was incredibly funny.
It is also really heartening to hear you say that Starbucks YouTubers, at least one Starbucks a coffee YouTuber has kind of come out and shown solidarity after the Schultz hearing. I got to confess, I wasn't super familiar with coffee YouTube until recently. I did the thing where I Googled which mocha pot should I buy, and then that sent me down the rabbit hole. And now like half of my YouTube feed is actually coffee YouTube. So now I have to go and look up the content creator that you're describing. But I did see a bunch of people doing, videos about the new olive oil drink, which I otherwise would not have been aware of. And it is interesting to see how those kind of ecosystems can really be important conduits for raising awareness about these sorts of issues.
No, absolutely. And I mean, like, I feel very thankful because we've had some incredible, like, big influential figures come out in support of the campaign before. I mean, Susan Sarandon follows us on Twitter, and I literally think about that every single day when I need a little
She's the best.
Oh my God, I'm obsessed with her. But, there's some, like, really cool influencers or content creators out there that have backed us up. One of my personal favorites, Lol Overruled on TikTok, also known as the hot TikTok lawyer. I actually got to DM him personally and ask him to like support our campaign, and he was enthusiastic and like so excited that we reached out. I've had personal conversation with Adam Conover, who has come out in support of the campaign, and it's been like those are like the public support from people who have a big platform is super important because a lot of like the media moves so fast, the news moves so fast that a lot of the times things can just get buried. There's all sorts of stuff, right? Like we all seen on the internet when it's like, why isn't the news talking about this?
For sure.
But,
so what's the call to action from your perspective? What would you like, the bad faith listeners to know? Are there ways that people can be supportive? And also, can you update us? What's the status of your Starbucks, your location's union efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. So my store actually won just under a year ago. We won 24-1. We were the first in LA County and in all of Southern California. Thank you. I feel very proud of that. My store is very proud of what we've done so far. But we are currently negotiating or trying to negotiate a contract. We're in that phase. But the company walked away from our negotiation table literally after less than 5 minutes. What
kinds of things are you asking for, and what do you think are the tipping points for them that caused them to walk away?
I mean, they were going to walk away no matter what. They did it at every single store, like before we could even read proposals. Day one, we couldn't even talk about proposals to them before they got up and left. Day two, we just started reading the proposals to them. And they kept trying to interrupt us, and they walked away for the same exact reason as day one, which is they claimed that we were recording them and broadcasting, which was not true.
Wait, and so you're sitting in a room with them, their lawyers or whomever, like at a table, and the second you start discussing proposals, they get up and walk away, or they try to filibuster you?
Yeah, I mean, they literally got up and walked out of the room and did not come back for the rest of the day. It sucked. It sucked a lot because, I did that for 5 or 6 different tables. For every store is, doing their own table. They have to. It's part of the stipulation agreement. But and they filed, as soon as they walked out of the room, they went to file unfair labor practices against us, claiming we weren't negotiating in good faith with them. And it's actually really funny because the Tuesday before the trial, so last Tuesday, all of their claims, all of their unfair labor practice charges were actually dismissed by the NLRB. So they got up and walked away from all these tables and canceled all these bargaining dates across the country, only for the NLRB to find that they had no merit in the claims that they were making.
So, okay. So eventually, has there been more substantive conversation? Do you have any sense of at all about, what the kind of confines of the negotiation are? And again, what is it that you're asking for?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, we're literally just asking for a more equitable workplace, pay adjusted. That way we can afford our rent and our groceries. We're asking for, consistent hours. That way we don't lose access to our healthcare benefits and our school and our vision and our dental. We're asking for, literally just like basic things right now. We're asking to enshrine organizing rights in our contracts so the company can't union bust. And that way it's, like they've agreed to not union bust in writing. We're asking for, better vacation. We're asking for seniority pay. We're asking for like literally just things that every job site should have to accommodate workers. I mean, Starbucks is a multi-billion-dollar company, and they're giving us less than the bottom of the barrel, despite claiming that they're such a great company with such great benefits.
A rail worker, Ross Grutens has come on a couple of times to talk about various issues involving the rail strike, et cetera. And he has gone out of his way to show some solidarity with not just Starbucks union workers, but Colectivo Coffee. There's been obviously a whole slate of unionized baristas or people who are seeking union in the coffee industry across the country over the last couple of years. And it's an amazing thing to see. And I wonder if there has been any other kind of more formalized or informal support shown between other people who have been unionizing in your area.
Yeah, I mean, literally, like, the list just goes on, honest to God. We've been with UTLA. We were out there with the SEIU 99 strikes. We work with SEIU directly on the campaign. I myself and workers from my store have gone down to the Medieval Times workers strike line in Buena Park to support them in their fight for contract. I helped organize the first Pete's Coffee in the country. And now our campaigns are very closely linked in friends. The list goes on. Like it's interesting, like, going from not knowing anything about labor to now all these unions, especially like all these younger unions, are partnering up and like showing up for each other and always in solidarity of each other. And not even just younger unions, legacy unions too, all these like bigger unions that have been around for ages, like, Teamsters. I'm always on the picket line with Teamsters, and I'm super excited for like what's about to happen with the UPS contract. And if they go on strike, I'll be right out there with them, because that's what you do. We're all workers fighting for better workplaces and better rights.
And the UPS is like not legally allowed to strike, right? It would be an authorized strike.
I don't know. I just watched their Twitter.
Yeah, it's been, as someone who's, what they call a geriatric millennial, it's been really lovely to watch. Because, the idea of any focus on labor rights, it was so anathema to me in my youth growing up. I say constantly, if I had known a single thing about what labor law entailed in law school, I wouldn't have avoided it like the plague. All I knew is that it was hard and that I didn't want to do it. And I think what an opportunity missed to actually know a little thing about something that comes up every day in my everyday life. And it just is really so heartening to see. I'm like so genuinely inspired by the commitment of people like you and the solidarity that is shown across all of these different sectors. The world where there was this effort to balkanize various kinds of laborers and say, the real union people are the guys in the hard hats, and baristas or retail workers or the like aren't who we're talking about when we're talking about the labor industry. Even when we live in an economy where that is the more prototypical type of worker. I mean, that was so toxic, and it's so beautiful to see how this generation particularly has resisted all of that and really moved to define what the labor movement looks like in these incredible ways. I'm so grateful to you for doing this and for coming and talking to us about it today.
I appreciate that. I feel very like everything you said. I feel the same to literally every person in a union that I've met since I got involved with this. And all of the allies that have shown up for us or given us the opportunity to share our stories. I had this kind of like revelation recently. Somebody asked me a question. I don't even remember what the question was anymore, but I literally just sat there and had like a moment about it. and I'm sure you can relate to this, but it's like it's very weird and very like life changing when you find a community that you truly click into.
Yeah.
And as a Black woman, I'm sure you understand. As a queer person, I very much first time I ever truly felt with my own was when I first got involved with the queer community.
Mm.
And that was, being able to kind of like share in the struggle of what it means to be a marginalized person in this country was the first time I ever really felt like I was a part of something. And then I never really recognized that until recently when I had that conversation, because I realized that the second time I've ever truly felt that was getting involved in the labor movement, and meeting all of these incredible people who are fighting not just for a better future for themselves, but for literally everybody. Like, the wins of labor are wins for everybody. I mean, COVID protections in California are owed to the labor movement. That like we had this like not incredible, we had a really solid safety net system for pay for workers who caught COVID or had to isolate. And that was entirely something that unions out here and the broader labor movement of California fought to win for us.
That's such an important point.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know where I would be without this.
Yeah, that resonates for me. I might have told this story in the podcast before. Forgive me, listeners, if you've heard it. But there was this moment on the Bernie campaign when I was flying home from somewhere, and I had I have a denim jacket, and I had all my like Bernie pins and whatnot, and I had my union pin on as well. And it was like a night flight, and the lights were off, and I was sitting there dozing, and I feel a tap on my shoulder, and I look up, and it's one of the flight attendants, and he puts like a lanyard around my neck, and I'm kind of like in a sleepy daze, like, what's going on? And I look down, and it's his union lanyard. He had seen my union pin and just like gave it to me, and as like this show of solidarity on the plane. And I was like, oh, I mean, I feel like a little bit of an imposter, but I completely agree with you about the kind of community that I have found on the basis of some of my like personal identities. It is also true that there is something that's kind of unexpected and beautiful about identity of interest that is discovered with people who don't share any of those similarities with you, but because you're fighting for the same thing. And of course, that's the whole day of allyship. Like, there's people who aren't gay or aren't Black or whatever, but are fighting for the same things that you were fighting for. But there's something that almost feels like there's something spontaneous, something unexpected about realizing that you can form those kinds of bonds over your shared goals with people who you might not ordinarily have expected to really be on your same team. And I think that it's so important for us to realize how much bigger our communities are than we're told that they are, because there's so much power in having those large communities. And so the labor movement is so important. I think that's why you see it being attacked in this way. You saw some pretty sympathetic lines of questioning coming from some conservative members of Congress that we shouldn't miss out on. People who were trying to pile on, like, well, Bernie, you're a millionaire. And who was the guy? Oh, gosh. There was one Congress member who also tried to do the I came from nothing spiel, and people fact checked him.
I think it was Rand
he was
Paul.
A millionaire. Was it Rand Paul?
I'm pretty sure it was Rand. Oh wait, are you talking about when Senator Mark Wayne whatever said that whole thing when he was in that when he was in the trial with Sean O'Brien from the Teamsters, the president of Teamsters? Because that was, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about how iconic that was.
But we'll talk about that while I try to Google this. Yeah.
He was Senator Mark Wayne so-and-so said something about Sean O'Brien's salary, and Sean O'Brien rebutted right back at him. It was like, what was your salary? And he goes, I believe I capped it out in 50,000. And Sean O'Brien goes, yeah, because you're telling me you were hiding money. And he just loses it. He's like, it's so funny.
All three of you guys have talked about employers being intimidating their employees. But you guys haven't ever spoke about when the unions try to unionize, the intimidation they have to other people that aren't wanting to unionize. You guys don't mention that. Because, see, I started with nothing. Absolutely nothing. In fact, I started below nothing. And I started growing this little plumbing company with 6 employees to now we have over 300 employees. And back in 2009, you guys tried to unionize me. My guys were making money. They were getting paid more than the union halls were paying their plumbers. Our benefits were better. But because we started bidding jobs that were union jobs and winning those, union pipe fitters decided they were going to come after us. They would show up at my house. They'd be leaning up against my trucks. I'm not afraid of a physical confrontation. In fact, sometimes I look forward to it. That's not my problem. But when you're doing that to my employees, and then when that didn't work, they started picketing our job site, saying, shame on Mullen. Shame on Mullen. For what? For what? Because we were paying higher wages? Because we had better benefits and we wasn't requiring them to pay your guys' exorbitant salaries? You talk about CEOs that are making all this money, and what do you make, Mr. O'Brien?
Well, I'm glad you asked that question.
Yeah, I know
Senator.
what you make, because in 2019, your salary was, what is this, $193,000? I'm sure you got some pay raises since then.
Yeah, when I was a
And the average UPS driver, the feeder driver, makes $35,000 a year. And what do you bring?
That's
to the table?
inaccurate.
Hold on a second.
That's inaccurate. State
I've
facts.
got it right here.
State facts. That's
The
inaccurate.
average UPS feeder driver makes $35,000. If you don't know your facts, then maybe you should.
I know them because I negotiate the contract.
So I say one thing to you. What do you bring for that salary?
What do I bring?
Yeah. What job have you committed, or have you started? What job have you created? One job, other than sucking the paycheck out of somebody else that you want to say that you're trying to provide because you're forcing them to pay dues? And
No, we don't force
Well,
anybody
Senator,
to
you've
pay
asked
dues.
the
You're out of
question.
line,
Let him
man.
answer
Actually,
the
I haven't,
question.
and don't tell me I'm out
You
of line.
are in line.
Don't tell me I'm out of line.
Well, you frame.
Don't tell me.
You
I'm
frame.
making a
You
statement.
frame. You
Sir,
frame the statement
you need
like
to
a
shut
tough
your
guy.
mouth
Yeah.
because you don't know
You're
what
gonna tell
you're
me to shut
talking
my
about.
mouth?
Yes,
Yeah.
I did.
Hold it.
Yeah.
Hold it.
Yes, I
Tough
did.
guy. I'm not
Senator,
afraid of physical.
Senator,
You don't have
hold
to be,
it.
but don't sit there and tell me I'm out of line.
Senator, you made a statement. You asked the question.
I didn't ask a question.
You did it.
You did.
I answered the question.
You asked the question about how much
Well, it was
money you made.
rhetorical.
Let him answer.
It was a rhetorical
Well,
question,
you
sir.
may think it's rhetorical.
It was
Sounded to me
rhetorical.
like a question. Let him answer the question.
I'm not yielding my time to him. So if you're going to let me keep my time, that's fine.
You'll have your time. Let him. You ask
your
a question. He has
So-
a right to answer that.
As far as my salary goes, my salary, if you follow me around, I actually look at this building. I bet you I work more hours than you do, twice as many hours.
That's impossible. But
No, that's true.
Sir, you don't even know what hard work is. You
Secondly,
wanna follow my schedule,
secondly, I'll do it in
please
a
follow.
minute. Secondly, UPS feeder drivers, and you can quote Carol Tomei, who quoted this. They make $93,000 on the lower end. Some of them
said
making
feeder drivers.
$150,000.
I said feeder drivers.
Feeder drivers, tractor trailer drivers. Some of them making $150,000 per year.
Some of them do.
And
I don't
most of them
disagree with
make-
that.
most of them
After
make
you've been
over-
there
most of
four-
them-
after you've been there 4 years.
Most of them make over $1,000.
Okay.
Most of them make over $100,000.
So reclaiming my time, I go back to the whole fact that, sir, you haven't created a job.
We haven't?
You haven't been there. You haven't.
Sure we have.
You haven't.
Sure we have.
Tell me one job that you created.
What are you talking? Be specific.
You're an
What do you mean?
employer?
No, we're not
You
an
employ
employer.
people?
No, but it's funny.
no,
we,
then
we
hold on,
create,
then
we
that's
create
not creating
opportunity.
jobs.
We create opportunity because we
Sir,
hold
that's
we
not-
hold greedy CEOs
That's
like yourself
not-
accountable.
You call me a greedy CEO.
Oh yeah, you are.
Hilarious.
You want to attack my salary? I'll attack yours. What
go
did you
ahead.
make? What did you make when you owned your company?
When I made my company, I kept my salary down at about $50,000 a year because I invested every penny into it.
Okay, all right. You mean you hid money?
No, I didn't hide. Oh, hold on a second.
Okay, go.
He said that's out of line. You said
All right,
I
we're
was
e-
out of
we're
line.
even, we're
We're not even. We're not even close to being even.
That's
Oh my God,
great.
I watch that
think-
clip all the time.
I think this was different, but it was someone argued that they didn't make that much money, and they were immediately fact checked, and they made a ton of money. But it was a very similar dynamic. Rand Paul was quoting Ayn Rand about entrepreneurship.
Horrible.
I mean,
Ayn Rand's Howard Roark points out the ingratitude that man has for the entrepreneur, the creator. Thousands of years ago, the first man discovered how to make fire. He was probably burnt at the stake he taught the others to light. But he left them a gift that had not been conceived, and he lifted darkness from the face of the earth. Now, Starbucks didn't exactly discover fire, But Starbucks did somehow, somewhere discover in the depths of man's soul that he would pay as much for a double mocha latte as he once did for a week's worth of coffee. My wife Kelly and I tried to get my grandparents some fancy coffee once, and my grandfather, a survivor of the Depression, informed us in no uncertain terms that he drank Maxwell House, $3.99 for a week's worth of coffee. The Pauls, although German, often missed the zeitgeist of the times, and so while we continue to purchase Maxwell House, others, our contemporaries, bought Starbucks stock and did much better than we did. Who knew people would pay $6 for a cup of coffee?
It was wild. It was a wild, wild west. Well, we're going to include all of these clips here. So if you don't have time to go back and watch the whole hearings, you don't have to. But oh my goodness, we've had some major banger hearings over the last few weeks, over the last month or so. This one I think was right at the top of the list. So.
I think it's really telling, right? So first off, Rand Paul quoting Ayn Rand. I had a moment. I had a whole moment in that crowd where I think my neck twisted around like one full rotation because I couldn't believe that I had heard that with my own two God-given ears. That was unbelievable. I felt like I had been transported to something absurdist reality for a moment. But then I think it's really telling and really interesting that Howard and Starbucks' only real allies during that trial, the only people defending him actively, were the Republicans and was Rand Paul. Like, Starbucks claims to be this huge progressive company, but then, why is Rand Paul on your side?
Exactly. And one other thing, since you made
Suspect.
that point, it's really frustrating that somehow people like Schultz get put in this progressive pile, because then conservatives go and do this whole like woke CEO thing. And there's like the sliver of like I know what they're saying, right? Like there's a way that like being on the right side of issues, and at least certain social issues, at least performatively, you're saying that you were discriminated against based on your LGBT status as an employee, at the same time that Starbucks is out here sponsoring pride floats and hanging flags around and acting like they're supportive and allies. So there's this way in which there's a superficial allyship. They treat people badly on the ground, and then conservatives take the superficial allyship and say you're a woke company and people should hate you because you're too woke. When they're not too woke, they're actually treating the marginalized groups very poorly, but they're like, you're getting it from both sides. Like, how do you argue with someone who thinks that Starbucks is too woke, that no, in fact, they're not woke enough and actually don't give a damn about the performative aspects of what they're doing? You just wish they would pay their workers better. It's like a lose situation in terms of how they've managed to paint themselves in the public eye, if you're coming from the perspective of what they're wanting to be substantive rights for the people who work at these companies. At any rate, that's my hobby horse.
I don't think I could have said it better myself, honest to God. Like, that summed it up. I was going to chime in with something at one point there, but I was like, no, that's it. Like, that's it. Like,
well, damn. Tyler, I so appreciate you. I've been wanting just to kiki with someone about what happened to that hearing for a week now. I appreciate you taking your time this evening to do it with me. Where can people find you on the internet and help to support Starbucks' union?
So I personally, I'm on Twitter at Union Tyler. But then also keeping up with us, the best way to do it is we have a newsletter. If you Google Starbucks Workers United newsletter, you can sign up there. It's bi-weekly. We send out a lot of really big updates and information there for the public to see. And you can follow our socials at SB Workers United, both on Twitter and Instagram. That's where we're mostly active. We put out a lot of really great information and updates there. We get to like highlight how beautiful and incredible our union is as well. And I think,
perfect.
We're, and TikTok, and on TikTok, because our TikToks are absolutely crazy. We are so fun on there.
I've got to get on TikTok. Again, as an elder millennial, I have struggled with using the app and incorporating it into a regular part of my life. But given that the days of having TikTok as an option in the United States of America might be limited, I need to get on TikTok.
You do. You absolutely do. It will eat your life up. So do set good, healthy boundaries with yourself, because I've definitely not done much today about TikTok. But there was one last thing I wanted to throw on there that I think your listeners might have some fun with. As Howard's trial ended and he was exiting the building, me and a partner named Gianna Reeve from Buffalo, New York, one of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life, actually took a printed copy of the Fair Election Principles, which is a promise to not interfere with union organizing, and we tried to flag Howard Schultz down. And we were semi-successful because we caught him in the hallway and we were yelling at him. Unfortunately, he had a posse of people surrounding him, and there were guards who were preventing us from moving forward. But we were able to scream at him to sign the Fair Election Principles. And it's not the first time that that's happened. The first time was actually in the Holocaust comparison meeting in Buffalo, where Gianna actually stood up in a crowd of all of these baristas and managers that were flown in, or all of these baristas and then all of these managers that were flown in, including Roseanne, the former president of North America, and Howard Schultz, where Gianna stood up and did the same thing and waved the Fair Election Principles at Howard and yelled at him to sign it and explained what they were out loud. So that was a key moment there for me personally, was being there with Gianna and being able to run after him for him to sign the election principles.
Let me guess, he ignored it.
He just walked right on out that building so fast.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you for trying. Thank you for doing the Lord's work, Tyler. Really amazing stuff.
Oh, that was my chicken soup for the soul. Like, I needed to do that just to get out some of the anger that I'd pent up listening to him speak in that meeting.
I appreciate your need for catharsis. I appreciate getting catharsis through talking to you about your catharsis. I hope that catharsis is passed on to all of the listeners of Bad Faith Podcast this week. As always, take care of yourselves. Keep the faith. I'll see you after the show on Call-In to continue the conversation. And if you want another episode of Bad Faith Podcast every week, you can subscribe at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast and get an extra Monday episode every week. Take care. Keep the faith. Hey YouTube, thanks for watching. Just a reminder that this is a podcast. You can catch an extra premium episode every Monday for $5 a month at patreon.com/badfaithpodcast. That's patreon.com/badfaithpodcast for $5 a month, an extra episode every week. Additionally, please do consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel. It helps us out. It helps independent media beat the algorithm. We appreciate you. And as always, keep the faith.